We're in Ostend, a city of more than 73,000 inhabitants on the Belgian coast. It's a sunny day in the middle of an early summer week. It's lunchtime and the beach is unusually calm. There are only a few children free from school and some elderly people enjoying the breeze and the pleasant sunlight. The waves roll in softly and they sound incredibly relaxing. Overall, the beach seems clean, but just because we can't see litter on the water's edge, it doesn't mean that it's not out there at sea. According to the United Nations, each year 52 million tons of plastic waste enter the ocean, contributing to an estimated 24 trillion microplastic particles. Microplastics are tiny plastic fragments less than 5 millimeters in diameter. They're small but have a huge impact on marine ecosystems. But what technologies can we use to identify microplastics in the ocean? Welcome to Euronews Tech Talks, the podcast that explores the digital, technological, and scientific landscape shaping Europe. I'm your host, James Thomas. Today, we wrap up our journey into the world of microplastics with an episode dedicated to their impact on the ocean. To do so, our podcast producer, Alice Carnevali, and our assistant producer, Victoria Harrison, went to Flanders, the Flanders Marine Institute, a scientific centre dedicated to marine research based in Ostend, right by the Belgian seaside. Here, they met 3 researchers and discovered how to spot marine microplastics and their impacts on the ocean.
The plastic has nowhere to go, so it just stays.
It is known that microplastics are being ingested.
Plastic production is still going up, so the amount of microplastics are not decreasing. So it's really important that we do something about it.
Alice is following Ana Catarino down a boat ramp just next to Flanders. Catarino is a senior researcher and leader of the Plastic Pollution Research Group at the Flanders Marine Institute.
So there's a lot of litter here in this boat ramp because the wind somehow pushes them here passively. It's litter that floats. It's mostly made of plastic, but not only. And we can see pieces of different sizes as well. So we can look around. We see here some ropes from the boats, filaments, slightly smaller, but also like tops of bottles, fragments that are not really identified.
At the boat ramp, concrete mixes with wild blades of grass, and among them lie several pieces of waste.
Something really, really interesting, we see a lot of these lollipop or coconut bud sticks. The coconut bud sticks, they've been forbidden to be made of plastic, but we still find them. So there's a lot of litter that we find that is no longer available in the markets, but it's legacy litter. So it stays in the environment for many, many years.
Plastic cotton bud sticks are banned in the European Union under the Single-Use Plastics Directive. The ban was implemented in 2021, yet plastic cotton buds are still floating in the ocean and polluting our beaches. A plastic cotton bud can take up to 300 years to decompose.
And what do you have in your hands now?
So I have a few small fragments, but also nurdles. So these nurdles are plastic pellets that are mostly used to produce other plastic applications. What's interesting about them is that they're everywhere, in the coast, on the roads, everywhere, because they're easily lost. So when they're being transported, they fall off trucks, for example, or from boats. And here you can also see that there's some plants in this slipway, and usually areas with plants retain plastics, so they trap the plastics. These nurdles, you can see that they also have different, we call it weathering. stages. Some are yellow, some are a bit more pristine, some are a bit degraded. The more yellow or the more degraded they are, it means that they've been in the environment for a longer time. The kind of nicer and round shape they are, it means that they're new.
Nurdles are tiny plastic particles used to manufacture plastic items. Just like plastic cotton buds, they're also at the centre of an EU regulation, which entered into force in December 2025 to reduce microplastic pollution. This law is directed at companies managing 5 or more tons of pellets annually and sets out clear rules to prevent plastic pellet loss in the environment.
1-2 days, you already have a litter there.
And although the North Sea isn't as polluted as the Mediterranean, the effects of plastic pollution are more than visible.
1-2 days.
It doesn't stop coming.
Yeah.
Especially if there's wind.
Research on microplastics started in 2004 when marine biologist Richard Thompson coined the term in his landmark article, Lost at Sea, Where is all the plastic? But how does plastic get into the ocean?
Plastic gets into the environment mostly due to either accidental loss, but also some intentional litter that it's spread due to behaviors that are not very nice to the environment, and also in some cases due to waste management that should be perhaps improved, so waste streams that are not adequate to the area. And there's also a lot of activities at sea that can induce release of plastics or other litter in the environment, such as activities where you lose fishing rope, loss fishing gear. It's also a big problem at sea.
Plastics, including microplastics, can enter the ocean either accidentally or intentionally, and microplastics specifically can develop over time through the degradation of larger plastic items.
There are 2 types of microplastics. Some have been made already as microplastics and they are used in applications such as paints or cosmetics, less and less, fortunately. And others are just the product of breaking down of larger materials, larger items that were in the environment already, and with mechanical forces like the waves, the wind, also because of the UV exposure, so exposure to the sun, they become brittle and they break into smaller particles.
But if microplastics are invisible to the naked eye, how do scientists know how many are in our oceans?
There are standardized ways to quantify. For example, if we want to know the concentrations, that's what we should report. We need to know either the volume of water that the sample has or the area of sand or soil where the litter is. This information is shared between researchers, so we try to follow similar methodologies so then we can compare our results. And this information is also ideally shared also with our regulators, with the policymakers. For example, some of the directives of the European Commission require that we report the quantity of litter, so policymakers can also take action.
Since it's impossible to count individual plastic particles in the ocean, researchers quantify microplastics by analysing samples and comparing data across them. Identifying these tiny plastic fragments, however, is no easy task. Microplastics are challenging to detect because of their small size and diverse properties. Specifically, secondary microplastics resulting from the degradation of macrolitter are difficult to identify due to their irregular shape and distorted chemical composition. Fortunately, a range of methods and technologies can be used to find them. And Nelle Meyers, postdoctoral fellow at Valise, has spent years researching these techniques.
There are different techniques to do this. For example, FTIR, so Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, which is based on infrared spectroscopy. So basically, there is an infrared beam which is directed at the particle. And so the light will be absorbed by the particle. And this will create an spectrum, so an absorption spectrum, which is very characteristic for the particle, which we can use as a fingerprint to identify the particle. So it's very accurate. But to analyze one particle takes quite a long time. So imagine you have to analyze over 100 or 1,000 particles. It's very time consuming. So it's also costly. There are also techniques that use fluorescence microscopy, like the technique that we use, for example. So we stain our particles with dye that is called now red. So it's a fluorescent dye. And because of this, the plastic will have a fluorescent coloration. And the type of coloration tells us something about the type of the particle.
Meyers' PhD research focused on the development of what Veliz presents as a more cost and time-effective method to spot and study marine microplastics. Her technique is semi-automated and built on fluorescence-based analysis. Here's how it works. The first step involves collecting the sample using a tool called the manta net.
This is a manta net. So it's called like this because it resembles a manta ray, as you can see, when it floats on the water. And so there's also the device in here that allows you to see how much water went through the system, because we need to know it to be able to estimate the concentration of microplastics in the water. So the water goes through and microplastics are retained in the nets, and then we analyze them.
The manta net is a cross-shaped object composed of a rectangular metallic part, a long net, and a sort of thermometer to check the volume of water passing through the net.
And this net is attached to a boat, I guess.
Yes, usually we take it out on the research vessel and we tow it behind the boat.
Once the sample is collected, it's processed.
So depending on the type of sample, we have very specific protocols. For example, we add digestive reagents to get rid of the material, such as hydrogen peroxide and other chemicals.
Once the sample is clean, it's time for the analysis.
So then your microplastics end up on a small filter. And then as a first step, what we do is we stain the particle. So we add the dye. And so, the coloration will differ depending on the particle. And then we take pictures under a microscope. And we use 3 different wavelengths for this. So blue light, green light, and UV light. And so these pictures will then be used to extract the color data of the particles. And this will be used and combined with a machine learning technique, which can then do predictions of the particle identity based on its coloration. And so the image analysis is automated, the model predictions are automated, so that speeds up the process. And then the fluorescence microscope, it's quite affordable to buy. And because of this, labs around the world could use this, so also those with limited resources. So that's a bit the idea, to make it cost and time efficient.
This part of the process is a little more tricky, so let's try to break it down. The microplastic sample is stained with Nile red dye and analysed under a microscope. This microscope takes 3 sets of images using UV light, blue light and green light. The data based on these images is then run in 2 automated programs, whose algorithms decide if the particles are made of plastics and their molecular composition.
We wanted to automate, so it speeds up the whole process. We wrote sort of code. So when you upload the picture, the image analysis is done automatically. So the particle recognition, the color data is extracted, and it is fed into the model. And then the predictions are also done automatically in an open source software.
Like any other method to identify microplastics, Meyers' technique has some limitations. It lacks information about the chemical composition of the particles and can determine only certain types of polymers, so only certain types of molecular compositions. Identifying microplastics is not an end in itself, but it's the first step to other studies that are essential to understand how microplastics impact the marine environment. This is Juliette Grandjean, PhD student at Veliz, specialising in microplastics' impact on marine invertebrates.
So you first select your polymer, then you need to see its shape, if it's irregular, if it's smooth. And we usually use clean plastics to have control conditions. So you usually select the size of the particles that is within the size range of the prey your organisms are feeding on. So for me, it's very low because my organisms are less than 1 millimeter in size. So I have species is Nitocra spinipes. It's a small copepod zooplankton, so a very small crustaceans. And what I try to do here is have a certain concentration of plastics in their control medium. So we try to be as in controlled conditions as possible. And then we expose them to these particles and we assess what we call different endpoints. So it could be development, mortality, reproduction, so all these kind of things.
Grandjean is only at the start of her research and she's currently assessing mortality. So far, she's not seen any impact of microplastics on her sample, but this doesn't mean that microplastics don't have an impact on the species she's analysing.
I'm not assessing as visible or visual effects as others, but it doesn't mean that if you don't see an effect, maybe you won't have another one when you do a longer period of exposure or if you go at the cellular levels. But it is known that microplastics are being ingested. They can abrade the digestive tract or block it completely. The organisms can also suffocate. There could be delay in their development, in reproduction.
Microplastics effects are not only related to the exposure time and to the type of marine species analysed, but also to other factors, including sea temperature, acidification, and chemicals. The list is long, and research on microplastics is still in its early stages. After all this science and lab talk, you might be thinking that marine microplastics have nothing to do with us humans. How could a microplastic particle eaten by plankton possibly affect someone living in Berlin? Why should that person care? Nelle Meyers has the answer.
It's a concept that is called One Health, meaning everything is interconnected, the environment, the species in it, and us as humans, because everything that ends up in the organisms, it can go into their blood flow, and that way, if we eat them, it can also affect us because the plastics end up in our stomach, can go into our blood flow, to our organs. So everything is interconnected.
One Health is an integrated and unifying approach, considering that the health of people is closely linked to that of animals, ecosystems, and vice versa. This approach is widely recognised and at the heart of major organisations such as the United Nations. The concept has ancient roots that go back to the 19th century, but was brought back to the spotlight with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which clearly showed the close ties between environmental, human, and animal worlds. And as everything is connected, climate change, the heat waves, and unpredictable weather we're experiencing this summer are, to some extent, connected to microplastics and the other way round. Here's Ana Catarino.
Plastics are oil derivatives, and of course, the more we produce, it means that the higher the release of CO2 is to the atmosphere, and that affects climate change. We also know that the fact that there is, for example, microplastics available to organisms that may ingest them, perhaps the effects are not immediate in this organism, but if they are vulnerable due to climate change, due to a heat wave, for example, these combined effects, they can be cumulative in the organism, so the organism may not be able to feed properly or to reproduce properly, and this may impact populations in the long term, for example. So if we have more sunny days and higher UV radiation exposure and heat waves and changes of temperature, that might, for example, impact the degradation of plastics that are stranded. But there are also people looking into more complex things like the carbon cycle. Are the plastics affecting this carbon cycle in the ocean? Is the fact that plankton may ingest or may interact with plastic affecting also the dynamics of plankton, and how does that impact climate change? There's indication that potentially it might have an impact, but I think we need to go a bit further into that.
There's still a world to be discovered when it comes to the effects of microplastics on marine species, humans, and the environment. Research into these particles began relatively recently and is still ongoing as scientists work to better understand the risks they pose. As this episode comes to an end, we hope we've not scared you about microplastics, but instead informed you about what we know so far. That's it for today's episode of Euronews Tech Talks. If you're interested in discovering more about this topic, listen to episodes 74 and 73 of Euronews Tech Talks. And if you want to put faces to our interviewees, keep checking our website. We'll soon release a video of our experience at Valise. A reminder that this is the last episode of Euronews Tech Talks before the August break. We'll be back in September with more stories about the scientific and tech landscapes shaping Europe. If in the meantime you want to stay in touch, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You'll find our email in the podcast description. Have a great, relaxing August. We'll meet you back here soon. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, James Thomas. This series was created by Marta Rodriguez Martinez. This episode was written and produced by Alice Carnavali. The theme music is by Leo Lebrun. Sound editing and sound mixing is by Joanne Breton. Our editor-in-chief is Ali Isan Aden. Thanks to Victoria Harrison, assistant producer for this episode. If you aren't already, you can listen to this series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Castbox, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider leaving us a positive review and, of course, sharing it. Thanks for listening.